Coffee.
Well, if no one's gonna drink this, maybe I'll just... Ugh, that's terrible. That's...
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am your host, Patrick Jordan, retired law enforcement officer, 38 years in law enforcement. And on this show, we talk about a law enforcement or crime-related show. We compare it to our own experiences and what is going on today. I've done 38 years in law enforcement, but I also come from a family of law enforcement officers. So law enforcement's been a part of my life for my whole life, as has movies and media, because I grew up in that generation when we looked and watched and we got sat in front of the television and just as a babysitter. So media has been a big part of my life as well for my whole life. I love the movies. But today's show, we have a really great show. But before I get into that, I need to talk about the LA mission. The Los Angeles mission has been around for 85 years, and it services the needs of the homeless community in downtown Los Angeles, also known as Skid Row. Now, the Los Angeles mission provides services for those who are on Skid Row, basic services. If they still want to stay on the street, they'll give them a bed for the night occasionally. They'll let them take a shower. They'll meet some of their basic needs. You know, some of the big ones are socks and underwear, believe it or not. They'll pass out socks and underwear. And when they're ready to get off the streets, they'll provide wraparound services for anybody that wants to get off the street, provide them the treatment they need for mental health issues or other medical issues. And they'll deal with their addiction problems. They'll also provide them with educational services, and they'll work really hard to reintegrate them in society. Those programs are pretty challenging. They include cognitive behavioral therapy programs, which helps somebody who's homeless or suffering from addiction or mental illness to make better decisions to get off the streets. It's not easy. That's a 6 to 12-month program for most of the people on Skid Row who want to get off. But they are also a faith-based organization, which means they get no money from the government because they make the sign of the cross. So what I'm asking you guys to do is to help out the LA mission by making a donation. Go to their website, losangelesmission.org, make a website, buy some new socks, buy some new underwear for the people on the streets, pay for a meal, and help them out. $25, $50, $100, anything helps. So go to the losangelesmission.org website and make a donation. I will tell you, if I challenge the CEO to put on some data to show that his programs are evidence-based, that they work, and they are working on a dashboard so that you can see where your money is going and how it's having an impact. You don't really get that from government, but they are working to provide that for you. So go to the losangelesmission.org and make a donation. Okay, I did want to remind you last show we did Sicario, which was a great show, and I forgot to announce that was the first show that I had a woman on. I'd like you to go back and watch that show, Sicario. You can still find it on Pop Culture Minefield. Just Google Pop Culture Minefield and the Chief, and you'll find all of my shows that come up. And when you do watch our shows, today's show or any other show, be sure to follow or subscribe to the YouTube channel, Pop Culture Minefield. Like the video and comment. That helps get it out to other people. If you're going to watch us on KGRA or on Rumble, you go to the KGRA channel, follow us there, and like that video, comment, and share that video as well. You can also follow us on KGR Radio broadcasting, the broadcasting platform. Just download their app and listen to the show. I am on every Tuesday at 8 in the morning Pacific Standard Time, so you figure out where that is for you. and listen to us live, or download us off Rumble or Pop Culture Minefield, Morning Coffee with the Chief, and listen to us after the fact. So today I have a really great show. But before I introduce that show, I will say we only have one guest today. My second guest had to bug out, and that's retired Inspector Danny Allen from Detroit Police Department. And I was really focusing on getting some folks from Detroit Police, because this program, White Boy Rick, is really focused on the city of Detroit. We will talk a little bit about the city, what's going on in the city, what happened to crack in the city. But he had to bug out, so I'm going with one guest today, and that guest is Retired Lieutenant Michael Donnelly. Mike and I have known each other for a long time. We were friends before we both went into law enforcement. Both of our fathers served on the Detroit Police Department, although I don't think they actually worked together. Mike was a member of the Detroit Police Department, and I think he worked there for 5 years, went on to work in the Livonia Police Department. But while on the Livonia Police Department, he got thrown back into a bunch of different task force narcotics and otherwise, and spent a lot of time in the city of Detroit. He has an opinion on this show, but he retired as lieutenant from the Livonia Police Department after 30 plus years in law enforcement. Good morning, Mike. How are you doing?
Good morning, Chief. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Did you watch the show?
I did.
And did it remind you of? This is a true life movie, so it probably reminded you of just stuff that you read in the news and stuff that was going on in the department at the time, the Detroit Police Department, or in the region.
Yeah, I was actually a police officer for about 2 years when White Boy Rick was arrested on state charges. So I was working on the west side in the 10th precinct at that time. And, younger, a little bit more naive, didn't really know exactly what was going on, wasn't privy to a lot of that internal stuff. But I was aware of it because it was really big in the news. The news media made a big deal about White Boy Rick.
Yeah, I was just home and I wasn't able to connect with Mike. I was visiting for a sister's birthday party, and like I said, I come from a family of law enforcement. So my brother-in-law is a retired sheriff from a local agency. My sister's retired from Detroit, and everybody's got an opinion about the White Boy Rick case. Let's get into the movie here. So White Boy Rick was released in 2018. It's an American crime film, and it's based upon a true story. As we're going to find out from Mike, not everything in the movie was actually presented the way it happened, but for the most part, it's fairly consistent with the storyline. And it stars the actor Richie Merritt, Matthew McConaughey, Jennifer Lang. She plays an FBI agent here. But what I always, when I see names that I recognize from movies that I liked in the past, and there's Bruce Dern is in the movie. He's the guy that shot John Wayne and the Cowboys, right? So, there's a story that made him the bad guy in Hollywood, because he is the one who shot John Wayne, and he shot him. I think he shot him in the back. And then Piper Laurie, some of you guys may not recognize that name, but she was in the movie Carrie. She played the mother. Remember Carrie? She's got the telekinesis stuff, and she gets mad at her mom, and suddenly the spatula and the forks and all the stuff are going into mom because she's had enough of this. She was, I think, she was really very religious, probably abusively so, and calling Carrie a sinner, and so Carrie used her powers to take mom out, and that was Piper Laurie in that movie. And she was a great crazy person in that movie, so she did a good job. And Bruce Dern is a great actor himself. And then of course Matthew McConaughey is very popular. This guy Richie Merritt, I never really heard that much about, but he portrays Richard Wersheed. Am I saying that, Mike, right? Wersheed?
Yes.
Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And he is White Boy Rick. And so this is based on a true story about a young kid who gets picked up as an informant because he's kind of deep in with some local drug gangs, and we're going to get into the ethics of using a 14-year-old as an informant as well. But he gets into the drug dealing stuff of what's going on in Detroit, the crack epidemic. And Martin, let's go ahead and start rolling the slides, and I'll start talking about scenes and stuff because I really wanted to talk to Mike about some of this, and unfortunately Danny's not here. It would have been nice to hear his perspective as well. But the scene starts out where his dad is, I would say he's on the fringes of the crime life. He's selling AKs. It implies that he's a licensed federal dealer, meaning he has the ability to sell this stuff, but he's making things that are illegal, like silencers, and they're turning around and selling these things to whoever wants to buy them. But that the people who had the money in Detroit at the time were the gangsters who were selling dope. Mike, he's selling AK-47s. Now, I remember there was a time when we were still carrying 6-shooters when the crack epidemic started. I don't think we've switched over till the early 90s, or the late 80s, early 90s, to Berettas 9mm. And these automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons were being put out on the street. So there's really two things going on here. It shows that the dad's kind of in the periphery of the criminal life, but also that, we have these automatic weapons that are flooding the street. Did you, as the crack epidemic exploded, did you see a proliferation of AK-47s and other types of assault rifles by the gangsters or the drug dealers?
Yeah,
in
they
Detroit?
were right. They were real common. Mostly handguns and small knockoff, like junk, small caliber handguns. But we started seeing knockoff Kalashnikovs, AK-47s. We started seeing like Daewoo, and what was funny, I was thinking about that when little 14-year-old Rick Wershey is with his dad, and he's saying that's not a real AK-47, that's made in Egypt or something, because there was all those knockoffs. We would get a lot of those cheap guns, but they were deadly. But most of the people that I saw shot, or most of the weapons that we collected, were pistols and handguns, semi-automatic handguns. But there were plenty of semi-automatic rifles, Mac 10, Mac, Tech 9s type stuff, those types of things, machine pistols. But they were all semi-automatic. I never saw a fully automatic weapon on the street.
When did you flip over from? I know what'd you carry as a revolver when you were in Detroit?
With DPD, I was issued a Smith & Wesson Model 10 5-inch barrel 38 revolver, and 1985.
But you switched over to what?
Yeah, but once you became once you were sworn and got on the street, then you could go and qualify with any type of semi-automatic handgun above 9mm or above. It had to be 9mm or above, but you could qualify with a semi-automatic handgun. So some guys did have semi-automatic handguns. My partner had one. And then I moved up into a bigger revolver. I had a 45 long Colt Smith.
That's what I was getting at. I remember coming home and Mike showed me his service weapon. I'm like, oh my God, that's the Dirty Harry type. A 45 long Colt is a big, heavy, intimidating gun. I guess that's what you needed in the city of Detroit. It was I kept my 38, and when I was a detective, I transitioned to a 357, the 2.5-inch Smith & Wesson. I liked that as a detective, and then we switched over to the automatics. But we did see automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons begin to flood the street in LA as well, and certainly I remember the Raven Arms, those cheap guns, and there was another one that I can't remember the name of it, but cheap guns that they had. But automatics started flooding the streets, and we had a lot of drive-bys, which we'll get into drive-bys in a minute. But the next one, Martin, let's bring up the one on Detroit Blight. Mike, I really wanted to talk about this because I don't think our audience, if you haven't been to the city of Detroit, and probably I imagine like Baltimore, and I know we talked a little bit about this the last time I had you on, is in '84 there was already a lot of blight happening, but it seemed to get worse. And just to give the folks an idea, the city at one time, this is probably when our dads worked for Detroit Police, had 1.5 million residents, and it dropped down to 750,000. And the city is a decent sized city, so when you lose half your population, you end up with a lot of blight. You end up a lot of factories are closed, commercial buildings that are closed, and homes that are vacant and ransacked. Could you talk about the blight in Detroit, both when you started and as time went on?
Yeah. What stuck out to me in the movie when the dad is driving with white boy Rick in the car, and it looks like they're in the area east of 75 and east of the Renaissance Center. down around Eastern Market. Looks like that to me. I'm not sure, but the river's like to the right or whatever. And that's all vacant. And that didn't used to be. There used to be neighborhoods and businesses all throughout the city because it's about 136 square mile city incorporated. And so when we were kids, I would say 1970, before everything really started collapsing, the neighborhoods were full and they were vibrant. You had a lot of apartment buildings. You still do, but not like you used to. A lot of stores and small businesses. And over the years, that's declined. So when you see that picture that was taken in 2019, I believe, when the movie was filmed, it's supposed to be representing, I believe, in the movie 1984 when he was 14 years old, because he was born in '69, and it does not look anything like Detroit used to in 1984. I mean, it really declined. Now, when you get into the neighborhoods, and I spent a lot of time in the neighborhoods, there are still some pretty good neighborhoods in the city in terms of how they look, and residents, middle class people, still working people. But then you get into some other areas and it's really tore up. On the west side, Brightmoor, any precinct has really I would say bad areas, or areas where housing has been demolished or it's vacant. And the city has spent a lot of time trying to tear down those homes. But you're exactly right. I mean, decline of population, the crack epidemic, the problem we had with crack in the 80s and the early 90s destroyed those neighborhoods. So, the crime was out of control. Ford Motor Company, GM, during the recession in the 70s, just helped get rid of a lot of the businesses. And then another thing is, they sent a lot of our jobs overseas into Mexico and other places. So a lot of people were left without those good jobs they had in the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s. They weren't making top dollar with benefits. So a lot of people got into a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, I know. I left Detroit in '81, so I grew up there, as you know, and I didn't see a lot of opportunities. I mean, there were other reasons why I left, but it was a city that was on the decline. It's been a long slide. I think a lot of the suburbs have managed to stay vibrant. A lot of ethnic communities. You had Polish communities, Irish communities, Italian communities. A lot of that all went away, and it was hastened by the high crime and high narcotics. And it's interesting. He's driving, when he's driving in the car with his dad, and dad said, "Why do we stay here?" Right. And his dad is kind of an optimist, we'll turn it around, And I remember hearing a lot of that about Detroit. It'll turn around, and a lot of investment, and never quite turned around at all. Right. So, and so now it is what it is today. I mean, I went back, had to move my mom out of the city a few years, maybe it was a decade ago, and her block held up pretty well. But once they got rid of residency, where the city employees were required to live in the city, a lot of people left, and she had 6 houses on her house that were tore up and burned down or burned out. They would go in and they take everything of value and then they burn it. And so it was time to get her out, and we got her out. And so that's what Detroit is facing. I imagine that is what a lot of like Baltimore and some other cities, even if it's just a part of their city, faces those kinds of things. And so we need to be careful as we embrace policies that chase businesses away or that allow for high crimes. Jobs are gone and hope is gone. That's what happens, and other things slide in there like crime and addiction. But hey, thanks for giving me the input on that, because I don't think, unless you've been to Detroit, you don't, or Baltimore, one of these other cities where you've seen this dramatic population growth. Because just think, 1.5 million, now half those houses are not, and half those businesses are not viable. And what happens to that infrastructure? It decays, which is what we're talking about. Any comment on that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, there's other things that happen too, in terms of population and the movement. You had, they built 94, they built 375, which was Black Bottom, and they moved a lot of businesses and Black residents out of those areas that were Black-owned businesses, and that's been spoken about a little bit recently in the news. But then they built 96, which I really think is the big one. When I-96 came west from basically downtown, it pushed out a lot of people. And then you had, the 67 riots pre-19, the 96. 96 was finished in, I think, 1976. And there was a big swath of housing and businesses that were basically moved. And it caused a lot of movement in the city. So you lost population that way. It disrupted all the neighborhoods. There's a lot of things that go into, I think, the decay of a city. And you can try to build the downtown area. I think the big problem is really, to be honest with you, is the lack of job opportunities, and the neighborhoods. A lot of neighborhoods are destroyed. There's people living in all the neighborhoods, but if it's not Palmer Park or some different areas like that, or Rosedale Park or something like that, a lot of those neighborhoods are in bad shape.
Yeah, and
not all of them.
But it was still, I mean, when I left, there was probably still over a million people living in the city. So it was still probably maybe 1.2 million. I mean, I left in 81, but when I left, it was fairly closely to the time frame that this movie actually starts,
right.
and White Boy Rick. So I can certainly identify with the blue collar white kid with not a lot of opportunities, because I solved that problem by leaving. And I know a lot of my buddies struggled until they got their niche and got something that they can move forward with. It wasn't exactly easy, and we embrace these policies that destroy economies at our peril. Hey, let's go on to selling AKs to the Currys, because this is where we really first start to see that he's kind of working with his dad, right? So he already knows the guns, and I don't know if his dad said go sell them to these guys or just go sell them. And he knows that the Currys are a drug dealing outfit, and obviously they're probably local to where he's at. And he sells the AK-47s and the silencers to these guns. And it's interesting for these guys they handle the guns like they're pros, right? And like they've done it before. And I just thought, okay, that's not realistic, because most of these guys don't see AK-47s all the time. And then but the cool factor is the silencer. Probably not really all that needed if you're going to go do a drive-by, but it's what does his dad say? It's like selling French fries with the hamburger. Sell the whole package and make a little extra money. But the fact that he's able to go to these guys and sell them, it tells him that he's at 14 years old. His dad is using him, and he's already kind of in the life. What do you think, Mike? And at 14 years old?
Yeah, like the real, what it was really like, hard to say. I mean, I don't know. I'd be speculating, but that's kind of the situation. He was somehow affiliated with the Currys, who were substantial drug dealers in the city at the time. And so you'll see Johnny Curry, the guy in the white tee, the wife beater. He's Johnny Curry, right? He's the guy that's married to Kathy Bolson. That's the niece of Coleman Young. Later in the movie, you see he gets married at the Manoogian Mansion, which was the mayor's home. But yeah, he was somehow affiliated with them, I think, with a younger brother or a nephew or something, or a cousin or something. But in the movie, he sold, or somehow the father was able to sell silencers, which started getting light on, sunlight shown on the father by the feds. And later on, you'll see that one of these weapons is used in a murder. So yeah, but AK-47s, those guns, we did see them, but these guys play with guns all day. Some of these people, some of the drug dealers, they have guns. If you find guns and you find money, if you find drugs, you find money, you find guns. If you're doing search warrants or stopping cars, you always find guns. So, I think a lot of guys are really familiar with firearms. They're proficient with them. They shoot them. They practice. And then another thing is the actual real bad guys, they shoot at people, and they've been involved in gun battles. So the average policeman never shoots anybody in his whole career. Most officers
I was just
do not.
worried as they played with these guns, they're going to shoot each other. But that's kind of. Hey, can we bring up Mark? Can we bring up the media that it's the Curry? It's the Curry group or the Curry gang. I can't remember what it was titled.
Yeah.
And so here it is. It's the Curry trafficking ring. So there were a couple brothers who the Curry family. Jonathan was the leader. I forget the name of the other guy, but they had a nephew or something called Boo, and that's who Mike was talking about, was friends with. But these guys were, they started out, I guess, with marijuana, transitioned a little bit to heroin, but they went deep into crack cocaine as crack became the drug of choice. As they began rocking it up, and you've heard me talk about this before. Once they rock it up, they made a rich man's drug, a poor man's drug, and addiction about it. So these guys sold this poison to the people in their own community, but they also sold it to all the white people who came into the communities to get this stuff. But what Mike was talking about, Mayor Coleman Young, so he was the mayor at the time. He was a long time mayor, and his niece was married to this guy, so there were connections. So when she got married in the say that again, Mike. How do you say that?
The Manugian Mansion.
Manugian Mansion.
Yeah.
That's the mayor's house. And so there were some connections, and it's implied through the movie that there was corruption. But so this is a true story. You can actually Google the Curry trafficking ring and get a little more information. You can take that down, Martin, about the Currys and their connections to Detroit police, their connections to the mayor, and certainly the mayor's family, and which leads to the accusation that White Boy Rick was targeted because he took down people that were connected to the mayor, which we'll hopefully get into. But that's who the Currys are. But they weren't the only ones operating at the time, Mike. There were other outfits operating. The Chamber brothers, I think.
Yeah, the Chambers brothers, who are originally from Arkansas, and there was a family of 14, but I think 4 of those brothers were in Detroit operating. They sold a lot of drugs. Currys. Then you had in that same era, and right around that time, you had a guy by the name of Maserati Rick Carter, who was ultimately, he was murdered. And what was crazy about that is he was shot, went to the hospital, and then the killer came back and shot and killed him in the hospital. You had Demetrius Holloway, who was a partner of Maserati Rick's. You had a guy by the name of Big Ed Hansford, who was the arch enemy of Demetrius Holloway and Maserati Rick. He did federal time. The Currys did federal time. The Chambers did federal time. And there's probably many, many others, lower levels, or maybe they were, at the same level of operating in the drug world at the time. But so an awful lot of drugs back then, still are now, but it was wide open back then, It was like
I remember. So as the decline of the city occurs, the population occurs, and you also see a decline in the size of the police department, right? So I think the peak I ever heard Detroit was at 5,500 police officers, and I heard that it dropped down to 3,500. Might even be lower than that now, but statutorily they had to keep it at 3,500 for a long time, and that they were outgunned and overwhelmed by the violence related to crack. Would that be because of a lack of staffing and a lack of funding? Would that be accurate?
Well, when I was on the job after the layoffs, and I came on in 85, they were just bringing officers back from layoffs from 79. They brought them back in 84. And we got up to about, I think, 5,600 at that point. I left in 90, then they had another short layoff period. But since that time, and with the population decline, so has the law enforcement, Detroit police numbers. They've dropped dramatically. So I think they're below 2,000 right now. But I could, I'm not, it's hard for me to say because I don't know who they've hired and who they've lost, but attrition's a big problem. But in today's day and age, it's even hard to hire police officers for obvious reasons. But they're below 2,000. So you're talking about a city that is 136 square miles and has, 10 precincts. And off the top of my head, I'm throwing that out. But, there's a lot of area to cover. And, precincts, pretty good size areas. So, and you're going from run to run.
Did you feel supported as you dealt with enforcing cocaine laws, or because I think one of the things I say on my shows is they increase the burden on, they narrowed the authority of law enforcement and increased the administrative burden. I know Detroit's gone through consent decrees and things like that make it harder for them to do the basic job. Is the department's perpetually been under threat with that stuff. Is that an accurate assessment?
Right. So with the consent decree, the officers lost their medical, things like that. I mean, those are things that retain employees and bring in new employees. You've got good benefits, these types of things. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I worked for DPD, I didn't feel that I wasn't supported. There was always a lot of things going on, obviously. But I thought inside the precinct where I was familiar, in the 10th and 6th precincts, I felt like I was supported. We had decent manpower then at that time. I never felt like we were undermanned. But as time moved on, obviously that changed. And, I went on to Livonia PD. But I've had still a lot of friends with DPD. And some of those guys retired and lost their benefits.
Yeah.
They lost their medical. That's a big deal. You put all that time in the 11th or 12th hour, they pull the rug out from underneath you. But just recently, DPD got like a $10,000 raise. So that helps, right?
Yes. Well, I think just to clarify to the audience, I think Detroit is one of 2 municipalities that declared bankruptcy. I think Stockton in California was the other one.
Right.
And by declaring bankruptcy, they were able to get out of their liabilities, their contractual liabilities to unions, which is why a lot of workers, including the police, lost some benefits. I think the police and fire lost medical, but some of the general employees lost medical and significant pension benefits. So,
right.
And that's what happens when you have a dying city. And I talk about this, in my other shows. I talk about when you pull back on law enforcement, crime goes up, investment goes down, and obviously that isn't the only thing going on in Detroit, but it's one of them. Right? If employers leave and you can't give people job, hope goes and crime goes up and your city begins to die. And we're beginning to see that. I was watching a show where they talked about a bunch of cities around the country are losing population. San Francisco is one of them. Los Angeles is another one. New York, and it's beginning to impact them. It impacts their tax base, that kind of stuff, so that you can do new things with them. They're struggling to finance their transit systems because nobody wants to ride the transit system. They don't want to go back and they want to telecommute. So there's a lot of things that feed into that. But the Detroit is I'd say, in fact, I think they use a word, Detroitification of cities is the word that they're using.
I have not heard
cities.
that.
Detroitification. I read that. Well, of course, once I saw that in the title, I had to read it. And that's what's happening. So when we pull back, when we do criminal justice reform, it needs to be evidence based so that we're not killing the golden goose, right?
Right.
The population and all this other stuff. So let's get into the informant aspect, Martin. Let's do the informant piece of this show. And now you worked narcotics, Mike, and you used informants all the time in narcotics. And I didn't use informants very much. My detectives had some informants, but we had some strict policies. But this is well after '84 and this stuff going on. Our policies tightened up as time went on. But I think for me, I can't imagine using a 14-year-old because being an informant is incredibly dangerous, right? That's number one.
Right.
When you're informing on the gang or the drug crew, you're putting your life on the line, right? You hope to get some benefit from law enforcement for being an informant, but here you got a kid and they're pressing him into service to get in with the Curry trafficking. And when I say they, I'm talking about the FBI and Detroit Police Department. And so for me, I was shocked that they would, I know that we use juvenile informants for some small stuff over my career, particularly early on, but anything. I never heard anything like this where they use a 14-year-old to do controlled buys. They use a 14-year-old to sell dope, and I don't know how much that is dramatized, but they did actually use a 14-year-old as informant. So first, let's speak to the ethics and the morality of using a 14-year-old. What do you think, Mike?
That would never, when I use the word never, it would never happen now. It wouldn't have happened when I was in the 90s, when I was doing narcotics with my crew. We would never have used a juvenile. We might have used a 17-year-old because they were considered adults at that time. that they could get charged criminally, at a circuit court level in the state or federally, or excuse me, in the state at 17. That's changed to 18 now, but we would never use a 14-year-old informant, just for the ethics of it. And in this particular circumstance, you never really know what really happened. I mean, we're looking at a movie, and I'm not privy to all the details of what happened here, but it's clear that they used him. But the father was knowledgeable. The father went and met the feds because of his situation he was in at a McDonald's restaurant, I'm told. And the son went with him, and he was introduced to these agents. And that's how they found out about the kid. So the father was somewhat involved in that, the actual meeting. And then the feds rolled with it. And then you had DPD officers that were working in conjunction with the feds. And there you have it. So there's no question that happened. As a matter of fact, the FBI agents involved with that case in the beginning came to White Boy Rick's, defense. And White Boy Rick has a lawsuit, or I don't know if it's been settled, but once he got out of jail in 2021, he's got a lawsuit. Well, I don't know if that's been settled or not, but that's because they used him when he was a juvenile.
Yeah, for me, I was shocked because it's like as soon as you hear his age, you're like, what? And just to clarify to the audience, there's different types of information. There's you can contact anybody on the street if they give you information about something. You might just use the generic term informant, but in this case, he was had at least had associations with the Currys.
Yes.
And they were using him to infiltrate, which is incredibly dangerous. It's not like talking to the mama on the street who says, "Yeah, I watch all the time. These guys are doing this." That's completely different. I'm sending you in to be, basically an agent for the police into this dangerous environment, and that's where they crossed the line. And there was another part of this where I think they begin to develop his credibility as an informant. So I got to rely on your knowledge here. So you can be an informant, but you're not a tested informant until you've actually given information and that have led to arrests or that where you've shown that the information is of high quality and reliable. So we call it reliable informant. So when they did the control buy, was that what they were doing, Mike? Were they making him a trusted or reliable informant by doing that kind of process?
Right. In that scene where he has the pistol on him in the car and he gives it to him, and they're like shocked that he's got a gun on him. I laughed about that one, but yeah, they were having him do a what they'd call a controlled buy, and we would brief the informant before we sent him in. We would search him to make sure he didn't have any weapons or any other drugs or any other money on him. Then we would give him, recorded monies, to make the buy that later on we could recover. And I won't get into how we did that, but then we'd send them in and we'd have to have an eye on them, and then eye on them when they left. It had to be controlled, so you don't see any of that in the background, but that's what they were trying to do. Trying to infiltrate a narcotics organization by making a controlled buy by an informant who would return the drugs back to the control officer, and then the officer would debrief them. Hey, what'd you see in there? Who'd you talk to? The other way you would do it would be either introduce an undercover officer with the informant or send him with somebody else that's an unwitting through that informant. Say, hey, take my buddy over and have him buy some dope. And that person unwittingly takes the police into the location, that type of thing. But yeah, that was a pretty good view of, he goes to the door, they're waiting outside at the vacant dope house, and he makes the delivery on the front porch. That was real common. That's how it was done.
Yeah. But once he's worked on a couple cases and his information is deemed credible, he's considered what they call a reliable informant, right?
Right.
Versus just anybody. So on anybody, you got to get corroborating evidence. With the reliable informant, you can go based upon their word, and that gives you the ability to get search warrants and do other things because he's a tested, reliable informant. Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. Well, the test used to be from the Supreme Court, credible and reliable. They had to be both. It was a two-pronged test, credible and reliable. You had to show they were credible and they were reliable, that they said that there was dope in this house and that, they bought dope out of the house and brought it back to you. And they've done that on a number of occasions. When you type your search warrant affidavit, you say this individual is deemed credible and reliable based on these 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times. But now it's either credible and or reliable. So it's one of the two. It's not a two-pronged test anymore, but you're hitting it. It's right, credible and or reliable. You have to just show that they are, that their information is good. And how do you do that? When he said, if he tells you, hey, it's this house on this corner, this guy drives a red Camaro, and he works at Ford Motor Company, and you go and look into that, and that's good. And then you said, he sells dope between 11 p.m. and 1 in the morning, and you see a lot of traffic coming and going. He takes some people off, and they got drugs on them. His information will be credible and or reliable. So that's kind of like that. There's a lot of scenarios, but that would be kind of what you would be looking for.
And so as these guys they're building his credibility and his reliability to be a future informant on probably bigger and better cases, right?
Right.
Which really, and this is where the ethics and the morality of this come in. That means he's now going to be a target. He's going to be a target, and ultimately he gets shot, as we'll get into. But it really puts him in a very dangerous situation. And when you're doing that, it's one thing to get information out of him to lead to somebody else who ends up becoming your main guy as reliable. But they're using him, and they've gone. And I really want to talk about this because there's so many things going on with the FBI in the last 10 years, and I think that the FBI are they're just as guilty as anybody else of headhunting. They want to make the big collar. They want to make the big arrest. And that sometimes they sacrifice the ethics or morality to do that. And that's what I saw in this case, that they sacrifice their ethics and morality. I mean, we have some bigger stuff going on, the whole Trump thing where McCabe, the number 2 guy, actually was dishonest, and their inspector general called him out on it. He was fired. I mean, the number 2 guy was dishonest or less than forthright, and he was fired. And I just think they get into headhunting. In this case, it was Trump or some Trump-related stuff, and they lose perspective. And I think you can see that. I think in this case, here we are. We probably would have early on said, I don't know about using a 14-year-old, even with the lack of experience in the 80s and 90s. I think we would have been a little reticent in doing that. But they seemed, and maybe we didn't. We don't see the backdoor discussions on their morality on whether we should use a 14-year-old or not. Because lots of times the FBI they get monitored by their special. There's other people in charge here, so that it isn't just these 2 agents. Right. They've talked about this. They talk about these cases. It's a task force. They're talking about the ethics of doing this, and they went ahead and did it. And now they're making him a reliable informant by having him do a controlled buy, and which leads to the next thing. It's the selling coke. I was really. I mean, I don't know how much. How true this is, and I'll eventually watch the documentary. There is a documentary out called, I think it's called White Boy, is the documentary. Yes. Versus the film, which is White Boy Rick. And the documentary is probably more supportive of White Boy Rick's or Rick Wershey's story than any counter argument. So go ahead and watch those, and you guys can come to your conclusion yourself. But the selling of the coke, I had not heard of giving previously seized coke, is what I assume it is, and to an informant to have them sell so that they become trusted, I guess, by the criminal. So this isn't about trust in the court. This is about trust of the criminals, so they can see that you're selling and you got game, and then he gets recruited by the Currys. I had a hard time believing this. I don't know, Mike. What do you think? Do you have an inside information that would dispel my my skepticism?
We would never have done that in the crew that I was on. I'm not saying it wasn't done, but we used to do reverse operations where we would pose as drug dealers selling dope to people who showed up with money to buy them. But of course, they never got their hands on the dope. Or we would bring drugs on the street priorly seized kilos and show them and flash them to make us look credible to the bad guys. I don't know if that happened or not in this movie. Is it possible? Yes. Anything's possible. We saw what happened back in with the Department of Justice and the guns going over the border. They were pushing guns over the border, and for what reason, I don't know, but they were doing that, and you ended up having a border patrol officer from Michigan that was in Texas killed with one of those guns. I forgot the name of that operation, but it was an Eric Holder DOJ thing. So, hey, there's your feds right there, and it wasn't dope, but it was guns. I'm sure it happens at that level. There's probably a lot of things that happen that we don't really know about, but I've never seen it done. I'm not saying it's never been done.
Yeah, I don't think that I've ever seen that or even talked about in Los Angeles by either the Sheriff's Department or Los Angeles Police Department. And I know which one you're talking about, the article. They were selling those guns and somehow thinking that they were going to be able to trace them.
Right.
People, which sometimes they come up with some really bad ideas. That one just seems to be, and this was formed at the highest levels of I think it was the DEA that was handling that one. Just dumb
brainiacs doing that,
dumb stuff. And so I had a hard time believing this. I wouldn't be surprised if if Rick, because he's in the life, White Bear Rick gets some coke and he starts selling on his own, and they turn a blind eye to that. Because he's their informant, right? So they're turning a blind eye to his street stuff. That I wouldn't be surprised of. So I had a hard time in the movie believing that. But given what's going on with the FBI, I think sometimes they lose sight of their oath and lose sight of right and wrong and how far they should or shouldn't go when chasing that big case. And the Currys, the thing about why would they be on the Currys more than anybody else? Because Jonathan Curry was married to the
Kathy Volson.
The niece of the mayor. What's her name again? Kathy Volson.
Kathy Volson Curry, but Kathy Volson.
Yeah, and so she's tight with the mayor. I'm sure there is a belief that these guys had corrupted the police department. In fact, at least one person goes down behind this corruption. We'll talk about somebody else in a minute. But that this connection with the mayor and the belief that city government and the police department is corrupt and in bed with these guys is probably one of the reasons why they would say, well, we have to use extreme measures, and using the 14-year-old informant was that extreme measure.
In this particular, I think what started happening, and this is speculation, so I just want people to understand that, not having inside knowledge on this, but there was a lot of things going on. There's always been a presence in a lot of the big cities, but in Detroit, for the FBI since the 60s and 70s, there's always been a scandal. And public corruption unit has been around for a long time in the FBI. But back then, I don't know if it kind of happened simultaneously, or there at one point they determined that Johnny Curry and Leo Curry were affiliated with Kathy Volson, who was the niece of Coleman Young, the mayor of the city of Detroit. And she was a party girl. And she was out running around with all these people on the street associating with narcotics traffickers. And they had a Detroit police officer and basically embedded with her by the name of Jimmy Harris. And he had a little bit of a history. He was involved in Stress, which is a unit my dad was in. And he got involved in a thing called the Rochester Street Massacre, where Stress officers forced their way into an apartment building on Rochester in the city of Detroit and got into a gun battle with what turned out to be Wayne County sheriffs. There was a Wayne County sheriff killed and one was paralyzed. They were acquitted on that and they went to trial. But Jimmy Harris was at that point basically promoted to the homicide unit and was working with Gil Hill, who turned out to be a city councilman. So he was the focus of the investigation of corruption. And it all goes back to the Currys. And you're going to show a clip, I think, about the house getting shot up. But
that's
kind of where this stems out of. Is where we're going.
We might as well explain that. So since you brought up his name, Martin, let's throw up Gilbert Hill and Beverly Hills Cop. An interesting connection with this show is Gilbert Hill was a player in this situation. It's accused that he was. It was alleged that he was in the pocket of these guys, the Currys, that they had paid him off to make sure none of the homicides. He was an inspector and was charged of a homicide bureau, which is where Harris, I guess, worked. And I think they were tight, is what
Yes.
I've heard from other people. But Hill had a cameo role in Beverly Hills Cop where he played Axel Foley's, Eddie Murphy's boss, and which kind of made him a little bit of a local celebrity. And I think he reprised that role in the subsequent Beverly Hills Cop 2.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think he did.
Yes, indeed, he was
did.
on 3 movies.
Thank you for our expert, Martin. So he so he had some local fame because of this, and it's alleged that he was also working for the Currys, at least to some degree. But he also ran for city council, and I think he ran for mayor and lost. So when the feds are hunting people and they're looking for people with connections, either this public corruptions unit for the FBI, they're looking for people like Gilbert Hill. And this is where I did have a disagreement with some folks when I was back, and I asked, do you guys think that Gilbert Hill was corrupt? And they said, absolutely. Yet one of our guests that we were going to have on said, that wasn't proven.
Yeah, so, he was never indicted.
Yeah, he was never indicted.
You have to be fair about that. The thing about it is it is alleged that when they, did the pull the telephone. This is well before texting and all that, right? And emails and all this stuff. When they pulled the phone records, Jimmy Harris and Gil Hill and other people's phone numbers were in Johnny Curry's, number logs, telephone. So when they went through that, they were able to identify that, hey, all right, he's calling this guy on this and such a date. And that was right around when this house got shot up and this 12-year-old boy, I think his name is Davian Lucas, was killed. It was they shot the house up because the uncle owed the Currys a bunch of money. How much, I don't know. You see that in the Skateland thing where they're arguing about money or they're talking. I'm going to pay that money back. That was kind of retribution for not paying the money. But they allegedly suppressed the investigation on the Currys because the Currys were worried about it. And that's what White Boy Rick did. He allegedly said, hey, he's talking to Gil Hill and giving him supposedly $10,000 to suppress the investigation so that no heat's on the Curry brothers. And an innocent guy was allegedly locked up but let go 9 months later because the FBI intervened on that and said, hey, you got the wrong guy. They went to his defense attorney and said, you got the wrong guy. You better let him go. So that's kind of what that is. And that corruption moves forward because the FBI never loses focus. Even after White Boy Rick's in jail on a state case, they're still working the public corruption angle. And they got Title III wiretaps up and all kinds of stuff. So who knows what they found out, but never indicted Gil Hill on,
Yeah, maybe he gave them information. Let's do one more scene before the break, Martin, if we can. And this is Vegas, because it does set up the corruption that Mike is talking about, which probably existed beforehand.
No, I don't think he's gonna. We have enough time.
We don't have the time. Okay, all right. How much time we got?
Oh, we can. I think we can do the commercial, the ad break now, so we can gain a little minutes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go ahead with the break then.
Chanel.
Hi guys, this is Gary from Pop Culture Minefield here on KGRA, and we're leaving for our first break. I hope we survive.
Did you know 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? If you struggle with focus, run low on energy, or when it's time to finally sleep, you simply can't, this can all be linked to dehydration, and Fuel Up has the answer. Our proprietary formula contains the finest cellular hydration with the strongest immune-enhancing natural ingredients. The Fuel Up system is made up of 3 different incredibly tasting varieties. Wake kickstarts your day with a jolt of caffeine. Play boosts focus while hydrating your cells. Rest not only helps you relax, but also rejuvenates your cells while you sleep. Here's what our clients have to say.
I really don't miss my coffee, and you can tell the difference.
So I'm going to take it for the energy. I'm going to take it for the play. I'm going to take it, all day.
And it works. That's the thing. It works. We love it.
Take the Fuel Up Challenge now, where we offer a Feel the Difference money-back guarantee. Fuel up for life.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Oh wow, we survived. Welcome back to the commercial break. Now for some more Pop Culture Minefield on KGRA.
Hey, this is Chief Jordan. I'm your host on Morning Coffee with the Chief on Pop Culture Minefield. Welcome back. We are talking about the movie White Boy Rick. We have a guest from formerly of Detroit Police Department and the Livonia Police Department, Mike Donnelly, who spent a lot of time in the city of Detroit, and he's helping us deconstruct this movie and talk about what happened in the movie. But I just want to remind the folks, if you like the content, to go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, whether you're listening to us on Pop Culture Minefield or on Rumble. Also, if you're on Rumble, follow us on Rumble. If you're on YouTube, follow Pop Culture Minefield, subscribe on Pop Culture Minefield. And make a comment and share with a friend so other people can hear this material. So, I wanted to we have to do Vegas because that kind of sets up what you're talking, Mike, in terms of the corruption. So, so let's show the Vegas scene. But so these guys are invited to Vegas by somebody who owes them money, right? So the house that eventually gets shot up is thought to be connected to somebody who owes the Currys money. And the Currys are promised tickets to see Tommy Hearns and was it Hagler? I think Hagler that was fighting.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, if you don't know who Tommy the Hitman Hearns is, look him up. He's from Detroit. A lot of connections to Detroit. I forget the name of the train. Yeah, Kronk. What's the name of the gym?
The Kronk Gym.
Kronk Gym, and it was Emmanuel Stewart was his trainer or something like that.
Yes.
And so he really put boxing on the map for the city of Detroit. He was excellent. I used to like watching him because I thought he was just so good. But we had a lot of great middleweights at the time. We had Hagler, we had Robinson, right, Sugar Ray, and Roberto Duran. So really, it was the heyday for that weight class, as far as I'm concerned. And so it was a big deal to be able to get tickets, ringside to see Hearns and Hagler fight for the middleweight championship, I believe is what they were fighting for. And so these guys are promised tickets from somebody that owes them money. And of course, they get all decked out in their furs, which I got to ask, did they wear furs like that, Mike, at the time?
Yeah,
they did.
I think so.
Okay. Well, see, I'm from LA, so it's too warm for those damn furs. But yeah, I look at these, I go, God, it's so out of step today. But back in the day, if you had part of your bling costume, I guess, was a fur. Of course, in Vegas, a fur probably doesn't work so well because it gets kind of warm there as well. But so these guys go to the fight and they're denied entry because they don't have tickets. There are no ringside tickets for them. And so they're already mad, and they're getting there's a guy there that's needling them, and who apparently is connected to somebody, probably the guy that owes them money. He's needling them, and finally one of the Currys, I think it's
Johnny Curry.
Johnny Curry has enough, and he picks up a champagne bottle and beats the guy near to death at a party. At some nightclub, probably in some casino somewhere. But that really kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen later in the movie, where the shooting happens, Mike. And so I did want to ask a question about respect. So we had a lot of drug gangs that are operating in the city of Detroit, and it's hard to say whether they had an agreement. All right, you got this area of town, I got this area of town. But there is an expectation of respect. There's this kind of street respect that they expect from each other. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, there's definitely a territorial issue. Respect's always a big issue, right? I mean, that's a big deal. But when these guys are beefing over area and who's selling what, I mean, that went on, and that was what's pushing a lot of the crime in the city in terms of shootings. Guys selling drugs in a house on a block they're not supposed to be on, or cutting into somebody else's customers. So that kind of stuff happened, you know, on the regular for sure. Yeah. I think in this particular instance is they either fronted Lucas, the guy that owed him the money. They either fronted some dope to him and he didn't pay him back, or that's real common, you know. So if you don't pay somebody back in the drug game, you don't pay them back the money, well, bad things are going to happen. So
Yeah, you don't get to go to civil court and sue them.
no,
You don't get
no,
to go
you
to the
better pay
police
up
and
your
have them
debt,
arrested.
you know?
So that's where the AKs come. You got to be able to enforce that collection, right? And
Right.
that's where the violence comes from.
And
And
it wouldn't be it wouldn't be uncommon for guys at this level. You don't want to hold on to dope.
right.
You want to move it on the street, right? That's where the money's being made. So if you fronted somebody, let's say you fronted somebody 20 keys, or 500 pounds or 1,000 pounds of marijuana, which isn't uncommon, and they've been good customers and they always pay it back, and then they either get robbed or they get taken off by the police and they don't tell anybody, and now the money's not there, you know, and you're paying, you know, back then I don't know what they were paying, 18, 15, $20, 20,000 a key. I don't know what it was, but you know, that money adds up, you know, so you got to get that money back coming off the street. So now you're out collecting, you know, if you got your dope out there, now you're fronting it to somebody to sell it. So the chain keeps moving, you know?
So these guys, they might, even though they might have been from different crews, they had a relationship
Sure.
based upon who had the coke to sell. And of course you don't want to sit on it. That's like anybody that, you know, just in time supplies, they want them off the shelf as quickly as possible. But
and
this
they all knew each other. They all ran in those
Yeah.
circles. They all knew each other. They'd see each other at nightclubs and they would see each other on the street. You know, they
All
knew
right, so-
each other. They knew who each other's crews were and stuff.
So the skate club, did that exist? They go to party at the skate club all the time. Was there a skate
There-
club like that you recall?
There was a skate club on the east side. There was a couple on the west sides. I was never at that one on the east side. I've seen that one, or a skate club on the east side. I don't even know if it's open anymore. I don't think there's a skate club in the city open now. You know, like on our side of town, there was the one that was on Greenfield and Grand River over there. Then there was one on Warren Avenue. They were real popular, but I don't think that's open anymore. I don't believe so. But, and I don't know if that's just part of the movie or what. I have no idea.
Well, I would assume that if going to the skate club to be seen at the skate, that surprised me because I don't think that would be something that would have been big in LA at the time, is going to the skate club. But that seemed to be where they hung out at, right?
Well, you know, the 8 Mile Skate Club, I think, is still open. You know, so.
But does it pander to that disco kind of thing, or that late night party thing, or is it just?
Yeah, I think it was a place where people went and hung out. You know, I don't think I can't speak to that on a personal level. I don't know, but I remember going by the 8 Mile Club and on the west side, and it would be jam packed at nighttime.
Wow.
So yeah, now if it's like that now, I don't know, but back in the 80s, all day long. Yep.
Wow. So you get your fur and you sell your coke, get your fur, get your Cadillac, get some chains, and you go to the skate club. A skate club is what the movie's showing. I guess that's realistic, because I think, you know, some people often you know, the country in those a lot of those flyover states or not cities would probably look at that and go, really that's not real. But we're hearing from you that it probably is.
Yeah, I think that probably was. I can remember the Greenfield before it burned down. I remember that one. I forgot the name of it, but it was on Greenfield near Grand River. That one was jam packed. There'd be kids lined up out the door at nighttime to go in, and it was a nighttime event.
So okay, so this dispute over narcotics, the beating in Vegas seemed to set up the drive-by that occurs.
Right.
And let's show the drive-by, Martin. So basically, some guys come with AK-47s, and they shoot up a house that is connected to Lucas, I think his name, who's the dealer. The dealer.
This is the house of yeah, exactly.
Right.
And his sin is double. But not only he owes them money, but they think that, or they perceive that he is the cause of the disrespect in Vegas.
Yeah, because they didn't have the ticket. He didn't have the tickets there, which it's one thing to go to Vegas, but then to be embarrassed at the ticket office that there are no tickets for you, and you were told that they were, and so it implies that the Currys are angry and they're going to take it out. I don't know why they shot up the house with the kids in it. Obviously, they probably thought the guy was there, but at least they were going to send a message. And so we really need to get into this whole drive-by thing, because drive-bys were a really big deal in the 80s and 90s in Los Angeles. And so there were places that were shot up with automatic or semi-automatic or just handguns in LA. Lots of times. It was very frequent. In fact, the only reason it really stopped was because you had Latino gangs doing drive-bys, you had black gangs doing drive-bys against each other, and then you had the Latinos and black guys doing shootings against each other. And it was I think it was the Mexican mafia said, hey, no more drive-bys. You have to do walk-ups, is what they call them. Because what was happening is, like in this kid, innocent people or kids were getting caught in the crossfire, and they were getting seriously injured or killed in these drive-bys. And the Mexican mafia, said, hey, that's not manly. You can walk up on the guy and just shoot your guy. And it really, for in LA at least, we didn't have as many of those drive-by shootings anymore. But drive-by shootings were part and parcel of the high crime, part and parcel of gang life, part and parcel of the crack epidemic in Detroit and other major cities. Did Detroit see a lot of drive-bys?
I don't know if the volume was that great. There's plenty of them, and there's plenty of instances where innocent people, because you can't see your target, are shooting. These guys are shooting from the outside of the home and shooting into a home. Those incidents happen all the time. And you see young children killed and people that are innocent. And generally it's, they're sending a message. Sometimes they shoot up the wrong house. Those types of things. In this particular instance, they had the right house, but the guy they were looking for probably wasn't even inside the home, and ended up shooting 2 kids and killing one, at least killed the one child, which was what starts bringing the heat on the Currys, which starts bringing in the police corruption and the affiliation to the police, and how the investigation is being suppressed. And the FBI is getting very suspicious that the suppression of this shooting is being done by high-level police officials. So I moved on a little bit, but that's kind of all together. That explains all that.
Yeah, we had one of our listeners said that her half brother is in prison for participation in a drive-by. He was 18-year-old at the time, and you know what? That's I'm glad thank you for responding, and I really and actually putting the age of your brother in there. People get into life. These young people, they have to be soldiers for these groups, and they end up getting used by these groups, because lots of times the drive-bys will be, in LA at least, the youngest gang member, right? If they're the one handling the gun and they don't have anything going on in their background and they're underage 18, they'll be treated differently, right? But when we got tough on crime, they went away for a lifetime. So when when you're doing a drive-by, regardless of your age, there is no discernment on who you're going to hit. You're going to hit whoever's in the house, or whoever is in the crowd, because that's a big deal. A drive-by where you got a crowd of people out front and you hit just about anybody. It's indiscriminate. It's evil. It's indiscriminate. But they use the younger people to do it. So which tells me the older guys know the liability and they don't want it, so they will send out the soldiers to do that kind of stuff. As probably happened in this.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be drug related. It can be just a neighborhood beef. It could be boyfriend-girlfriend beef. There's a lot of reasons why these things happen. In this particular instance, it was related to narcotics trafficking and a debt owed, I believe. So this little boy got killed, and the murder was not investigated properly because the Currys were being protected by high-level law enforcement officers. That's the allegation.
And I remember when it says Damian Lucas is the name of the kid, right? He's 13.
Right, I believe
which
so,
is
yeah.
ironic, because he's only 1 year younger than Rick was when he started as an informant. If I mean, I'm like, okay, well, he's only a year away from being in the life, right?
Right.
But I remember them talking about this as being a big deal. I think one of my family members told me about it as well, because it hit national news. 13-year-old boy. I mean, I want to say, unfortunately, kids getting killed in drive-bys was usual, but it was still infrequent, right? I mean, it happened, but it was still infrequent. And when it does happen, lots of times, even before social medias, they'll hit the national news. And you're right. So there was a lot of pressure whenever something like this happens, where a kid is killed in a drive-by, because we certainly felt it here. There's a lot of pressure to get the people responsible and to put people in prison, and so that these things don't happen again. And so I can imagine the pressure on the police department to solve this crime. And what is alleged in the movie is the Currys denied involvement, although they had a great incentive for being involved. They denied involvement, but they're using their political connections to avoid responsibility, or to at least not be focused on. Can we put Gilbert Hill back up again?
Yes.
Martin. And so
Yep.
Gilbert Hill was a head of homicide. So we have kind of link. Gilbert Hill is the guy with the Beverly Hills Cop. So he's the inspector of homicide. And so he would be the perfect guy to direct whether the investigative strategy, although I can tell you our captains here in charge of homicide really don't tell the homicide investigators how they're going to do their cases. They just manage the bureau. Let's put up the one with Gilbert Hill, Martin.
Yes, I just wanted to show that in the last paragraph, they're talking about the possible or the alleged involvement of Hill.
Yes. So and in fact, I think in the show they show a scene where Jonathan is calling somebody, and it sounds like Gilbert Hill, because if you watch him in the movie on Beverly Hills Cop, you can hear he's kind of got an animated voice going on the phone. And the goal was to not look at the Currys as suspects, and that would, I think it's kind of implied, it would avoid the scrutiny into their narcotics dealings, as well as them being liable for any shootings, right? Because if you start looking, because what do you do when you want to take down shooters, right? You look at what they're doing, the causing shooting. You start disrupting their narcotics operations to get information to take them down, right? So they don't want that heat. Put the heat on somebody else, and it's implied that they use Gilbert Hill to do that.
Right. It's alleged, and this is what starts getting White Boy Rick in trouble with the Currys. It's alleged that he told the FBI, White Boy Rick told the FBI, that Johnny Curry had contacted, he was in the car with Johnny Curry, and Johnny Curry called Gil Hill and said, we got a problem. And Gil Hill said, don't worry about it. Basically, we'll take care of it. That's kind of the alleged type of situation. And, phone records allegedly show something like that. Now, I don't know how it happened, but that's the allegation. And that's why Gil Hill was being looked at, with his affiliation with the Currys, that he was basically covering up a murder of a 12-year-old boy. And he was a commander of homicide at the time.
Right. So he has the ability, and I think that, and so how do they figure out White Boy Rick is the informant? Well, obviously, a limited number of people hear that conversation, so a limited number of people know that it happened. As in anything, when the FBI starts investigating police, no matter how hard they try, the police are going to figure it out. You can watch the investigation go down. You can watch as the feds start asking for information. They can recognize. You can recognize that suddenly the attention has focused on you or on your department, and you can start tracing that back. And this is where, I mean, the ethics of, so even though they got the information, the FBI got that information, given that they gave from a source who's in danger, and I think now Werschel's now probably 15 or 16 at this point, by using that information and it clearly coming from him, they clearly put him in danger at that time, because now he's got a lot of political enemies beyond just the Currys. He's got potentially, if the allegation is true, Gilbert Hill. We did have some police officers that were corrupted, right? You said
Yes.
Harris. What's his name?
Well, Jimmy Harris was basically the bodyguard for Kathy Olson, who was married to Johnny Curry. And he was a Detroit police officer.
And it was alleged that he was actually providing protection for shipments. Was that one of the allegations for him?
Yeah, and that happens after, White Boy Rick is already locked up in a state case. But at the time, I think that White Boy Rick still has a relationship with Kathy Bolson and suggests to her that, there's a big shipment coming in, and the FBI sets it up to get later on in like 1991. So it could have been that White Boy Rick was talking to Kathy Bolson or corresponding with her even after he was locked up, because he had a relationship with her after Johnny Curry was in federal prison. So he snitches on Johnny Curry. They go to jail, but Fed case, federal prison. He goes to state prison, but he still has a relationship with Kathy Bolson, and Jimmy Harris is still protecting her for the mayor.
Right.
And
Gil
Hill's involved.
And I heard a couple different explanations for why maybe Detroit police weren't aggressive. One, that they were corrupt. Then that's what we're talking about now. But the other one was there was an attitude that Mayor Coleman Young's family was untouchable, and that it wasn't that police were corrupt, but that police, they have careers. They don't want their career destroyed because they make an arrest of somebody that is known to be connected with the mayor. I don't know if that attitude was prevalent, Mike. Obviously, you were there on the department at the time. Would you say that was a prevalent? How many years did you work for Detroit where Coleman Young was mayor? Was he mayor while you were working for Detroit?
He was married from. He was the mayor from 74 to. He did 20 years, like 84. No, excuse me. No, he was mayor for like 4 or 5 terms. Yeah.
For to 94-ish. So you would have been there.
I should have said, yeah.
Yeah. So you would have been there for the 5 years. What was there a belief that the mayor and his family were untouchable? Did you guys like, let's just was there an attitude in the department that supports that?
I think well, two things. Kathy Bolson's father was Willie Bolson, which was the father was the brother-in-law to Coleman Young, and he was a drug trafficker.
Oh.
So, I learned this as the years progressed. I wasn't at the time as a young police officer really tuned into that, but there was always political stuff. Like if you mess with the wrong person associated with anybody that was a big hitter in the city, you stopped the wrong car. There was always kind of that hanging over your head. It wasn't, I wouldn't consider it to be like, public knowledge at the time, but people knew. I think the public kind of knew. He ran a machine. Coleman Young ran a machine in the city, for 20 years. And, he was an unindicted conspirator in the Magnum Oil Vista disposal FBI investigation with the water department. And, he was pretty much untouchable, and his family, they fell underneath that untouchable status. So I think if you could put 2 and 2 together. I don't think as a police officer, I didn't feel it when I was working, is what I'm getting at. Other people may have.
Well, you weren't high enough up the food chain, but the higher you go,
I was just a street cop. Yeah.
The more likely your career could be impacted if you want to be a lieutenant or if you want to be an inspector, which is the rank above lieutenant.
And those are appointments that you didn't get made inspector, but after lieutenant, it was all appointments and all politics.
So the suggestion that it wasn't that the police were corrupt, it's that police, they just avoided those things that would be problematic for them career-wise or for the department by just turning a blind eye to some of the shenanigans of the Coleman Young regime. So he was running a Tammany Hall in Detroit is basically what he was running.
One thing that I'll say, my perspective is, I do think there was corruption at certain levels. Jimmy Harris was clearly getting paid when he should have been working to protect. That's corruption, to protect the niece. But they were protecting dog shipments. As a matter of fact, my my tax sergeant, we had a tax sergeant and a tax officer that ran our academy class in 1985. She was involved. Marty Hurrah was her name. I don't know whatever happened to her. Seemed like a nice lady, but she got picked off doing protection of something coming in through the city airport, which later on becomes a factor with Willie Bolson and Jimmy Harris, where they get picked off on a case out of allegedly out of Miami with a drug dealer that was going to bring shipments of dope. It was all a ruse by the FBI. And there was 11 police officers that were arrested in that. So there was corruption. There was dirty cops. Definitely. Right. Now, that's been going on for years, though. There's been dirty police officers since day one. You know that. Mm-hmm. There's always somebody doing something. You guys had Rampart, in L.A. That was a big deal,
Yeah. I don't know if we had the level. I think the closest. Yeah, it just the tentacles that reached up to the mayor and that the mayor had somebody so close to him was who was the dealer himself, right? Volson is who you're talking about.
Yeah, he's a drug trafficker. They were a known drug trafficking family. You
and
didn't get close to him.
I don't think, yeah, because so, or you're the mayor, you obviously know what's going on. You have your associates; they know what's going on, and so you're turning a blind eye to this, and and he probably did set that tone. Hey, leave my people alone, meaning his people, his family alone, and the people associated with me alone, and and I'll tolerate the police department now. And to be clear, I mean, my perception of Mayor Coleman Young is he ran against the police department every single election. They're evil. They're this. They're that. They're oppressors. Even though he was clearly in charge of the police department as the mayor, it was a political narrative that he used all the way through as he served for whatever 4 or 5 terms.
Yeah,
it was
that was definitely his first. The anti-stress unit. The invading force in the city. Because there was like 22 shootings by stress officers, which is crazy. Is that Jimmy Harris was involved in one of those. But he wasn't penalized after he got found not guilty. He ended up getting promoted, and he didn't have to take the test. He just got promoted. They used to have on the charter, you could promote somebody on the charter. It was called a charter promotion. Hey, the mayor wants this, or the chief of police wants this person promoted, and he was rewarded and ended up as a sergeant in the homicide unit. And I think he worked on the mayor's protection staff as well for years.
And that's where he worked. He actually worked for Gilbert Hill, which then taints Gilbert Hill, who I think has passed away from cancer. But
Gilbert Hill passed away. Yeah, but he was never convicted of anything.
So let's just say it was alleged that he was a corrupt, but
alleged,
yeah, and there's
not proven.
Seems to be some strong circumstantial evidence that he might have at least known what was going on, and but anyway, so that the mayor's family were, if they weren't untouchable, they were pretty close to that.
Well, and the feds actually made a case in 90 or 91 on Willie Volson and Jimmy Harris. They went to federal prison, like I said. So they were trying to get Gil Hill, but he didn't want to jump in.
Right.
He wasn't involved in the deal. He told him, I have to think about it.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah. Yes. He never committed to getting involved. So he's smart. He must have sniffed something out, but
Well, I mean, he already had a lot of, I don't get it myself. I mean, you're an inspector, you got a decent pay, you got at the time benefits, and you got a little bit of notoriety. So you're the man about town, right? Why would you give that up for a little bit of money? Because in the end, that's what it ends up being. It's just a little bit of money. Yeah, power. Yeah. So that's. Yeah. So hey, let's get on to Curry, since we're talking about. Oh, let's go on to get shot. So this is where White Boy Rick gets shot, and this is where the kind of the chickens come home to roost for the FBI, right? So he gives information to them. Clearly, to me at least, it leaks back to the Currys that somebody is
a snitch.
Is a snitch.
Yeah.
And there's only a handful of people who knew about the conversation regarding Gilbert Hill, right? So that's not common knowledge. And Rick was one of those handful of guys, and even though he's included in the family, he's the white guy that's there, and he is. They figure out rightly or wrongly, or they figure out that it's him, whether they had good information or not, that it was him. They figured out it's him because they did have a Detroit cop that was part of this task force. So they had Detroit police that were part of the task force. So it wouldn't be surprising if they were able to figure it out through departmental sources that Rick was an informant. You kind of agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, it's possible. It's hard to say. It might have just been the fact that Johnny Curry knew who was with him when he had that conversation.
Yep.
You know, and he probably, I mean, my guess is 1986, something like that. He's probably got a bag phone in the car, like all the, dope dealers had bag phones before people had cell phones. He's probably on the car talking, and he overhears a conversation. He informs the FBI, and Johnny Curry thinks back and says, there's our snitch,
Yep. There's 4 people in there. One's my brother, one's my cousin, and one's Rick, right? So
yeah, and that's all speculation on my part. It's hard to know, because there's a lot of urban legend about this whole case,
Right. So somebody goes over that he recognizes. It's a friend. I couldn't help but think of Goodfellas, the movie.
Yeah.
It's not gonna. It's gonna be your friend that comes and shoots you.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
how you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
And so he lets him in. He's talking to him. It's going great. And even the guy says, "Hey, man, I'm sorry, Rick." And then I'm sorry, and he shoots him. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And I say the chickens come home to roost on this one, because this is the FBI's worst nightmare. Their juvenile 14, 15-year-old informant gets shot.
Right.
And obviously that, I would think, knowing how the FBI operates, that would inspire a lot of investigation as to their behavior, and did anything they do lead to it, which I think it did.
Right.
Absolutely. They shouldn't have been using them in the first place. And of course, I think they're trying to clean their hands of this, the FBI at this point. So he survives the shooting. He's in the hospital. He's in critical condition. He had to wear a colostomy bag at least for a while. So this was, some serious damage here. And to me, I was looking at the FBI thinking, these investigators are thinking, oh my God, how do I clean this mess up? How do I justify this? And one of their ways is to get them out, hey, you're done, right? Let's not make a big deal out of this. That was the other part of that, because do you really want to prosecute the guy who shot? Because what's going to come out? Well, he was an informant for the FBI, so that's why he got shot.
Yeah.
They didn't want that. So let's not make a big deal out of it. So I saw them, kind of moonwalking backwards on this, trying to clean themselves up with this. Did you kind of get that from the scenes as the FBI are in the hospital?
Yeah, in the movie, I saw it that way. I clearly saw it that way. Like, but in real life, in the business that he was involved in, drug trafficking, street level stuff, and people coming in the houses, I know there's no question in my mind, he knows who shot him. He lived and wasn't going to snitch. That is very common. Guys thinking, well, if I make it through this, I'm not talking, because I got to live out here, because they'll come and get you,
Right.
So I don't know at what point what the FBI, if they showed up to the hospital or not. They may have. In real life, in the movie, it was clearly like, oh boy, we got a problem here, Yep, same thing. But, he wasn't the only 15-year-old kid shot in the city around that time. There was a lot of kids shot in the city at that time, In my career, there was kids getting shot all the time,
Well, hey, I guess we should show a picture of White Boy Ricky. Mark, can you put his picture up to show what he looked like around the time of his? So there's actually a picture of him, which is, yes, I had that hairstyle when I was, maybe not the long hair in the back, but where you kind of parted it in the center. You go ahead and take it down, but that's what he looked like at the time. See, when I had hair, that's kind of the hairstyle I had there. I think he's bald now too. So we
yes.
were both cursed with us. I went into law enforcement. He became a crook, but we both lost our hair, right?
He's about 8 years younger than you too.
Yeah. So I just think that, yeah, he wasn't the only 15-year-old shot, but he's probably the only FBI informant that was shot in retaliation for giving information to the FBI.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's the important part of this thing. I know that we had informant policies where we used juveniles, but not for something like this. And even for us, it got tightened up because it had to be tightly controlled, and they would prefer to use somebody who looked like they were under 18 and was an adult versus a juvenile as an informant. But I can't get past this thing that I can't believe the FBI did this, but they did. And the other part of this, and I know when I talked to our other guest who canceled out, and I certainly talked to you, that he was in the life. He's definitely in the life. Heavily Rick, right? I mean, he's taking risks. He's getting paid by the FBI, but he's also in the life.
Yeah. And the thing about it is he when he gets arrested, he's only 17 years old. You know what I mean? He's an adult, but he's still a kid. But he was he was doing what he wanted to do. He had his own mind. He was doing, Dad had, I guess, throwing him out of the house, and he was selling dope out of another house with some other people that he was running with. I don't know if he met in school or from the neighborhood, but when we talk about White Boy Rick, it seems like he's this big, huge trafficker, 8 kilos. But, at the end of the day, he wasn't pushing that much weight. There were people out there pushing a lot more weight than he was. And they all went to federal prison and got out, and they're all out, or they're dead now or whatever. They were killed. And he does 30 years in prison for a 650 case where in 1996, or I believe it's 96, they appealed the 650 law, the lifer law, and he still stays in jail. He catches another case when he's in jail, a commercial auto theft case. And that's why he went down to Florida to jail for a few years, a year and a half or 18 months. It's like a commercial auto theft deal with, I don't know who was involved in it. Somehow his mom and his sister, but what the reality of that, I don't know. But he took the case. He copped the plea. But he did 30 years in prison on a lifer law after the lifer law was appealed, and he was still there. And I can only imagine there's one reason why, because he snitched on the wrong people, from being 17 to 52 years old or whatever.
Well, let's go on to our next, the Currys go to jail, because we got to talk about that. And so now the feds do come after him, right? They do go after Curry, and they bust his thing. I think probably a lot of pressure from Damian Lucas, the movie implies that they have to show results. The police have to show results, and the feds are also engaged. But Damian Lucas made it put the emphasis on actually bringing somebody to jail for this, or holding people accountable, and dealing with the drug crews that are operating in the city, because the residents are getting mad and angry. But it's the feds who take him down, and that's what they did not have mandatory sentencing with the feds yet. That came in, I want to say that came in 94, 95. So that would have been before this. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, I'm not sure about when the feds if they got mandatory sentencing, but they always do things by the month. Like you get 12 months, 24 months, 30, 80 months, whatever. But with the Currys, they were taken down to the feds on like RICO charges, and I think they probably had a Title III wiretap up on them, I guess. So they were listening to telephone conversations. I would imagine all those things, the tools that the feds have. So they were taken down on conspiracy charges and wire fraud and, money laundering and all that stuff. But they were not, they may have been a focus, the Damian Lucas, but there wasn't a murder charge. And so those guys who were responsible for all that drug trafficking and all these other crimes they committed, conspiracy to commit this and that, probably ordered a murder. They did time for those charges, but not for the murder of Damian Lucas. So it's crazy.
But it would have been, it would not have been unusual to, hey, if I got a good case, let's execute the case, and hopefully we can get some information on the shooting, right? So
right.
If they've been building this case all along, we got enough. Let's take them down. Let's disrupt the organization. Let's see what we can come up with in terms of information on one, who shot Rick, but also who shot Damian Lucas.
Right.
That wouldn't have been unusual. That would have, particularly for the feds, because they want to be the ones that come up with the information. They do like to be the front runner on some of these cases.
Right. But once again, neither of those cases were solved because, number one, White Boy Rick didn't snitch on who shot him.
Right.
And they never closed the Damian Lucas case. That's an unsolved murder, but I think they're pretty sure who ordered it. But who the actual shooters were, I'm sure they've got an idea as well. But DPD never solved that crime.
All right, so he's he's been shot now. He's recovering, and the Currys go to jail, and it's implied in the movie, and I think it's true that he was actually out. They stopped using him as a foreman. The Currys are in jail. He develops a relationship with Jonathan Curry's wife, who is the niece of the mayor, right? He
Kathy
develops
Volson.
some kind of sexual relationship with
Right.
with her as well. That's what's in the movie. But this is after he decides to get back in the game. And I think I wanted to go back a little bit and said his dad did find out that he was being an informant and selling coke, and that's what kicked him out. He said this is too dangerous. So his dad was on the fringe of the life, but there was only so far he would go, right?
Right.
But then, he finally says to his dad, hey, Dad, are we going to keep living like this? Why don't we do something about it? And it implies that his dad acquiesces and goes along.
I don't think that's true.
That's what it implies, because then he got his video store, right?
Yeah.
I
think I don't know. I in an interview I looked at something the sister Dawn said, hey, we're representing wrong, and obviously she has a reason to represent the family in a particular light, but he was actually thrown out of the house. I think her boyfriend was living in the house too, and at the time, and they moved out down the street and were selling dope over there on the east side. And he's only 17, and this is a short window, 3 years. He goes from 14-year-old kid running with the Currys, FBI informant, shot, to doing his own thing. He's got a good source for coke, and now he's moving it.
Right. And we have to back up a little bit and talk about his sister Dawn, because I think it's important. One of the things when I watch this movie and other movies regarding the crack epidemic is people get addicted, and it's implied that she got addicted there. I don't know if it implied that she was doing prostitution, but that's what it did imply that she was selling herself for crack, whether it was to one or two guys or a whole bunch of people. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we used to call them strawberries, right? So if somebody gets hooked up on crack and then they're selling in LA, that's what we call them. They were strawberries, and cocaine strawberries.
Yeah.
And they'd sell themselves for $10 rock.
Yeah.
And
I think in this movie it applies that it makes her look. It never shows her shooting any heroin or using or snorting any heroin or anything like that, but because people do both. But
right.
And it kind of implies that she's strung out on heroin. And, that's what that is. I don't think they allege that she's smoking rocks. But in the interview that I read, a little bit of, and I'd read this before, but she says they allege that, they're basically kind of saying that I'm a heroin addict. She goes, I never used heroin. Now, maybe she was using cocaine. I don't know. But, she was 3 years older than Rick, so. She says, no, I wasn't involved in heroin. That's all made up. Yeah. So that's just it's just a movie based on a true story. So there's probably some, non-truths in this movie to make it look good,
But when you were working the streets, there were a lot of women who did become addicted and did sell their body.
Absolutely.
For just a rock. They would do just about anything for a rock once they get addicted. I think that's maybe she's supposed to tell that story in her scene in the movie, is that, these women get addicted and they sell themselves. And when I worked in West Hollywood, they had streets for boys and girls. So girls and boys would get addicted and sell themselves sexually just to get that rock or that hit of meth. And
no question, day to day, right? Just moving day to day, trying to make some money to get the next hit or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I say, our permissiveness right now, particularly in California with Prop 47, the expansion of fentanyl, because that's highly addictive if it doesn't kill you right away.
Right.
And people are selling themselves or giving themselves. I mean, I was watching this interview up, and it was a guy who was addicted to fentanyl, and he says the only way I can get money for fentanyl is to give blowjobs. So he's out there giving sex to people so that he can maintain his habit, right? And that's what's happened. That's the destructive part of this we can be permissive on drugs, but people are destroying themselves simply to get that drug. I kind of saw that in the scene with her, and then, of course, they go and rescue her, which is a lot of drama.
Right.
But that does happen, and it did happen then, and it's happening now. And this is why I have such a problem with our permissive attitude towards things like fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and others, because it does destroy lives and it destroys people. And if I had to say Rick is evil about anything, the fact that he's selling this stuff makes him evil, because this is what it does to people.
Yeah, the sale of cocaine was crazy. So even in the 90s, in cases I worked, we were locking up, white, black, and Hispanic. Everybody was involved in it. When I say everybody, every group of people was involved in it. And there's such a appetite for cocaine, on the powder cocaine and the crack cocaine, that there was so much of it out there. So the allure of money, I mean, locking up a 19 or a 22-year-old kid or whatever with $100,000 in a shoebox underneath his bed, or money in a wall, or money in the trunk of a car, money hanging in a pillowcase in the back of a door. The money was there. So the draw, the allure, having nice clothes, driving nice cars, that was there. And back then, how flashy drug traffickers were. They were driving around in high-end cars. They had bag phones. They had really high-end clothes, jewelry. For the most part, drug traffickers are a lot low-key because of the forfeiture laws, because that's what law enforcement was doing at the time. They got the forfeiture laws in place, in the federal forfeiture laws and the state forfeiture laws, and these agencies were chasing these guys. And it wasn't uncommon for you to find a lot of money, a lot of guns, and a lot of dope all together. Guys got real smart in the long run. They started separating all that. Kids still get a good hit, but they tried to do the dope separately, front the dope, and then get the money back later. And so he was new into the game, and he was making a lot of mistakes. That's eventually what caught him.
Right. Okay. Well, let's. So he does get back in the game. So Martin, he's back in the game, and he decides that he kind of convinces his dad, this is what I got to do. In the movie, I think his dad tacitly goes along with him, but
yes,
he gets some coke, and he starts selling it, and so that they can improve their life. He goes back and gets a sister out of what would be considered a flop out or shooting gallery, where they all are shooting coke or meth or whatever it is that she was alleged into in the movie. But he gets back in the game and he starts selling, and he recruits his friends to start selling for him. Now he goes to somebody that he has been identified as somebody that moves heavyweight, another white guy that's involved in this crew. And he's a real character too. I looked him up. I can't think of his name right now. I want to say it was Richard too. I could be wrong, but he goes directly to him and asks for supplies so he can start selling on his own. And that's what he actually does, even though he's out. And this is, for me, I get shot. Boy, that's a big life lesson for me. Get out of the way.
Right.
But a lot of these guys, that this is their only option, or they think it's their only option, even after they suffer something like that, they get back into it. They go back into it because that's what they know, and it's easy money for them.
Yeah.
Talk about the easy money part of dope dealing, Mike, versus going to get the job at the Dairy Queen.
Well, you're your own man. You're making big money. I mean, you can bring in a lot of money. I mean, for a young man, 17, 18, 20 years old, somebody even 30, you can bring in a lot of money and live a lifestyle that you could never have lived any other way. You don't have the education, whatever it may be. But we would stop kids with, 15, 16-year-old kids with $10,000 in their pocket. That's a lot of money for people that don't have money. We know at the end of the day, $10,000 is nothing. But if you're not, if you can go out to the mall and buy any kind of pair of tennis shoes you want, or drive a nice car, or have nice clothes, or, maybe you got a kid and you're trying to survive, that's big money. And I think he was caught up in the allure of it, and he had good connection for a source for getting his birds. So, his cocaine, his kilos. So he was able to, to have 8 keys, that's not really a lot of cocaine in the scheme of things. He's not really that big of a hitter, but for a young 17-year-old guy to have a source that can get him 8 kilos, you know, and have 30 grand on him when he gets arrested, that's a lot of, that's, you know, he was moving some weight, but nowhere in the scheme of where the Currys were at or anybody else, what Maserati Rick or, you know, Holloway or Hansard or any of those guys we're talking about. You know, he was kind of a mid-level guy, you know.
Well, working his way up, maybe, I guess. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know what.
Sure.
I think it was applied. Let's get enough money to get out. I think his dad said, "We got enough money. Let's get out," and he
Yeah.
didn't want to stop. You know, because
No.
there is an allure to, when you're making big money,
Right.
and you get the girl and you get the nice car, and you don't want to give that up, right? That's
Oh, absolutely. It's an illness at that point. You know, you can't let it go. It's an addiction in itself, and it gives you the ability to do what you want to do and go where you want to go. You know, you're your own boss. But like all these guys, him, you know, White Boy Rick, Curry's, if you last 5 years in that game, unless you're really smart and are lucky, and you play your cards really tight to the vest and don't trust anybody, that's the key. You're not lasting. Either you're getting killed by your opponents, the ops, or you're getting picked off by the feds, or you're getting picked off by local PD. You know, and every one of them suffered something like that. You know,
right.
He wasn't in the game very long, if you think about it.
Well, he lasted 3 years before he ended up in prison for 30 years. I mean, that's,
you know, probably legitimately maybe a year and a half. You know, I mean, when he was legitimately actually selling, you know, when he was his own guy.
Right.
Not that
right.
long. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so let's bring up the next scene. That's sleeping with the mayor's niece. Now, this was interesting. And so he went to her wedding with Johnny Curry, right? And he go at the mayor's mansion, and there he's associated with him. They all know him, and now he's moving some weight, and she's in. You know, why don't you come to me? She's interested in him, right?
Yep.
Because she's in that life, and he's got the money, so he can give her the life that she wanted.
I think you nailed that, Chief, right there. That's what that was all about.
Yeah, she can give him the life, the party life. She can get some of that back, because it's interesting. She said, "Well, we're smart. We're out, and he's in." That's what she said. I think she said that about Johnny Curry, her husband. Well, how's he doing? Well, you know, he's dying in prison. He's, you know, but we're smart. We're out. He's not, right? That's I talk about it, and this is his wife, right? So, but so talk about so she has an attitude about the party life too, and she wants to continue that party life. So she ends up sleeping with him, who is, I think he's 16 or 17 at this time.
Right.
So I think, well, the age of consent in Michigan is 16. I think I looked it up at all the states at one time, and I was surprised Michigan's was 16 and California it's 18. So he could consent, and he did, right? But now he's. And I don't know if he thought this was partly a business transaction too, because now maybe he'll have the protection of the mayor. But I don't think that was ever, or the mayor's family. I don't think that was ever going to happen for him, right? Because he's the one who's partially responsible. He's a threat, basically, to the establishment, the criminal, corrupted establishment in the city of Detroit.
Yes.
Yes. So he's a threat, and so if they couldn't take him out by shooting him, they can certainly take him out by arresting him, right? But this was apparently a true story. So he did in fact have a relationship and sleep with.
And I may be wrong about this. I know he had a child with another woman, and I don't know, but I think he may have had a child with Kathy Olson. Now I could be wrong about that, and if I am, I apologize. But
well, I will say, you know, he did get out of prison. I know we got to go on to his arrest and talk about some of that, his fight to get out of prison.
Right.
But he was arrested recently for spousal battery in Florida.
Yeah,
it was
domestic violence thing.
Was it March, I think, or maybe it was last month? I can't remember which, but it was within the last couple of months. And they said that he had a Ferrari, he had some other, so he had, I don't know where he got his money. Maybe he won his lawsuit.
Could be, but I think he's also involved in locally here as a partner in a marijuana distributor situation. So maybe that's where he got his money from. I can't say. You know,
you can get your bag of White Boy Rick marijuana now, huh?
So well, he's got a name, right? So I think his people that are supporting him, you know, like the name White Boy Rick, and they brought him in. And I don't know if he's still involved in it, but he was on television last year talking about it.
Amazing. So crime does pay after 30 years in law enforcement. You get to be part of a dispensary to
Right.
get rid of or to sell marijuana, legally sell marijuana.
Yeah.
So the next one is his arrest, Mike, and you had some. This did not actually go down the way it happened, according to you. So let's talk.
Not the way I understand it.
So let's show the scene, Martin. So he, basically they do a raid on the family house. So it implies that they've been investigating him, probably did control buys on him or his network, got some informants, no doubt, because there is no honor amongst thieves. Informants will give up their boss, right, to get. Well, you work narcotics, right? So to get out of a charge, people roll over on their boss, right, Mike? That's
right.
The game. That's how you do it.
Right. Well, I think in this particular instance, they show the house getting raided, and the officer that was his control officers and DPDs involved in the raid team, and they don't show how they built their investigation, and then they take him to jail, and then he gets charged with a 650 charge, and the movie ends pretty quickly after that, really, if you look at it. But in reality, and if I'm correct on this, I know one of the officers involved in the actual arrest, a uniform officer from one of the number 5 East Side precinct and or number 11. Anyways, East Side. He gets pulled over, in a car, and he flees from the vehicle, I believe, and he's got a box with dope and coke and money in it. And if I'm correct, he hides the money underneath a porch of a house, but he gets arrested. And then a little kid comes along and says, "I saw where he put this box." So they recovered $30,000 and 8 keys, I believe. It's all from a traffic stop. Now, the officer that I'm referring to, I saw him in court within a year after this arrest, and not knowing really too much about it. I had worked with this officer at the water department when he was laid off. I was working for the water department before becoming a police officer. He was in court and he said, "Yeah, that car we weren't supposed to stop," meaning, the boyfriend, Kathy Bolson's, boyfriend, mayor's niece. We weren't supposed to stop that car. Now, I just heard what he said. All the details behind it, I don't know, but I don't believe it was like a narcotics raid. I think he got popped in a traffic stop. And there may be some people out there that will listen to this and say, "No, it happened this way or it happened that way." But that's my understanding of how it happened. He was in the car either as a passenger, but they stopped him and he bailed. And then they ended up getting him. And at that point, with the weight that he had, I'm sure they may have executed some search warrants. I don't know where all the weight came from, but he definitely had the cash on him. So they made their case from, I think, just a simple traffic stop. And maybe those officers knew who he was. I mean, my guess is, they probably knew that he was slinging some pretty good dope back in the day. And they said, "Oh, there he goes right there." And they made a stop for whatever reason. And he bailed out of the car and made it worse for himself, And that was it.
The guys that are least likely are the line guys. They're not going to be influenced by the politics. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I regret to inform we have like a minute and a half.
Okay, well, let's wrap up. Mike, thank you for coming on the show.
Right.
And if you're listening to the show, if you like it, please do me. You got the inside information on what was going on with White Boy Rick, not what they showed on TV. Some of it influenced the movie, and some of it, didn't make it into the movie. But if you like the show, please like the button on both either Rumble or YouTube. And I want you to subscribe on YouTube or follow on Rumble. And my next show, I'm looking to do No Country for Old Men. So I'll have Dr. John. I'm going to have Dr. John Sullivan on, an expert in Mexican drug cartels. So join us next week. And if you didn't watch my last show last week, is Sicario, another great show about the border. And anyways, you can find us every Tuesday, 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Pop Culture Minefield, Morning Coffee with the Chief. And Mike, any comments before we let you go?
Hey, yeah, the last thing I'd say is that if you look at it, the reason why, in my opinion, the reason why White Boy Rick was in jail as long as he was, I mean, he did more time than anybody else for an alleged nonviolent crime, 30 years. He snitched on the wrong people. He put the wrong people in jail.
And that's probably true, and it certainly
there
was implied in
applied
in the movie and applied in the documentary.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe an unpopular opinion. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, We really need to go now. So
All right,
Chanel,
Martin.
please, if you.
Those sons of bitches. Ma, I'm doing a show.